John Fergus is nearly synonymous with SCCA Road Racing Sports 2000 class. The Ohio Valley Region member actually began his SCCA career, though, as an autocrosser, winning solo national championships in 1977, 78, and 79 before turning his attention to road racing. And with 7 wins at the SCCA National Championship Runoffs, all in Sports 2000, he trails only 9 others in the history of the club. In addition to his Runoffs Championships, he also won 3 Pro Sports 2000 championships. John also scored 13 wins in IMSA GTU competition and won the championship in 1991. And while a successful driver, Fergus was also active in his home region, establishing worker awards, worker parties, and training seminars, and strengthening the region during the 1990s when it hosted the Runoffs annually at Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course. Fergus's respect stretches beyond the SCCA, as evidenced by his role as Vice President and Treasurer of the Road Racing Drivers Club, or RRDC. And racing was truly always a family affair for John, and his son Corey is now a successful professional racer and an SCCA champion. For his contributions on and off the track, John Fergus has surely earned his position in the SCCA Hall of Fame.
You know, I think for a lot of people, when they have a passion for a hobby or a sport, if you look closely enough, you'll see that behind them, there was someone that fostered that, someone that they could emulate, someone that they could learn from, get encouragement from. And I don't really think it matters if it's that hobby or that sport is wine tasting or baseball or football or flying an airplane, hunting, fishing, whatever the case may be. And certainly in motorsports, I think there's someone there that brings you along, a fire starter, if you will. And for John Fergus, that fire starter was his uncle, Uncle Robert, Uncle Bob, as they called him. And Bob was a very prolific road racer in his own right in the 40s and 50s, a pilot as well, until polio really weakened his arm and his upper body, and he couldn't really hustle those very physical cars around anymore. But he had gotten the fire started in his nephew and in John. And Uncle Bob was there at a lot of the races that John ran. In fact, he was there in the beginning when it all started for John in Solo 2 competition. John won 3 national championships in a row in the late 70s, 77, 78, 79. The hat trick, back to back to back, however you want to look at it, it was well known that John Fergus had talent behind the wheel. So he took that talent to SCCA road racing and immediately was successful. In fact, in his first year in 1980, he was the SCCA National Rookie of the Year, and then parlayed that success into 7 SCCA National Championships in Sports 2000. If you were a sports racer anywhere from the mid 80s to 2011, you certainly knew who John Fergus was. And I think the thing that made John so good behind the wheel is what makes him so good in business and everything else. There was an intellect that came along with the raw talent and the passion, and he married all those together, and he found success in SCCA club racing. But for John, it's like a lot of club racers. I've always said, you go to an SCCA majors and you look at somebody who wins those races, and especially in heavily contested classes, those drivers have the talent to compete at some of the highest levels of sports car racing anywhere in the world, but it's about opportunity. And that's what sets John apart. He took his intellect, his business acumen, and his prowess behind the wheel and parlayed that into professional racing. He won 3 Pro Sports 2000 championships, and then took that success and became a driver for factories such as Dodge and Ford, BMW, Oldsmobile, and Porsche as well, doing time behind all of those manufacturers' steering wheels, working for them. In fact, for Dodge, he won the GTU championship in IMSA competition in 1991. So not just a sports racer. He raced for Roush and for Ford at the Rolex 24 and the Sebring 12 hour and finished on the podium. He was in car number 2, not literally car number 2, but the second car on the team, and they finished second. So you always make sure that the guys that are in the championship finish on the top step. And John did exactly that. He did what he needed to do. He understood the business side of it, but he could certainly wheel the car. And you talk about fire starters. Well, I think John is one too, because if you know the Fergus family, you know that John has lit the fire and passed it along to his son, Corwin, who I will always call Corey because I've known him since before he was actually born. But Corey, a very successful racer in his own right. He too has an SCCA National Championship in Sports 2000. Took that and went pro racing in IMSA and in SRO. He has a touring class championship in SRO in 2015 on a team, that's right, run by John. So you can see that that fire has moved forward by passing that torch along to his son. In fact, when you talk to John about some of his favorite racing memories, one of them is a race that he didn't win, but in fact, a race that Corey won. The very first time that Corey ever beat Dad, and John laughs and says, I set a new track record trying to chase him down and get by him, but I just couldn't. But I had the bigger smile in Victory Circle, even bigger than Corey's with his win, because I was so proud of what he had done. But you talk about passing things along. That's the other thing that John has done throughout his career. He's a race director in SRO now for their TC class, their touring car class, and he uses his knowledge, his experience, and his demeanor to try to help young up and coming professional drivers find their own success. So there's a give back. He also founded and funds the Ohio Valley Region SCCA Worker of the Year Award. And he does that to make sure that the people in white, the ones that stand out on the corners in the sun and the wind and the rain and the cold and the heat, that they get not only acknowledged for what they do, but that they know that we understand we can't go racing without them. He's also vice president and treasurer for the Road Racing Drivers Club. Uncle Bob was one of the early members of a Road Racing Drivers Club as well. And that's an organization that globally helps young drivers understand both the business side and the driving side of the sport. There's a lot of give back from the RRDC into the motorsports world. So you can see why John Fergus is a very worthy inductee into the 2021 Sports Car Club of America Hall of Fame.
Good evening. Mike Cobb called me a couple weeks ago to share with me the news I was being inducted into the Hall of Fame. I was pretty excited and at the same time a bit humbled, and it gave me pause and time to reflect on the journey that I've been on to get to this evening. And as I thought about it, a couple themes kept recurring. Good fortune. I had the good fortune that my father and my uncle were in the automobile business. I grew up with cars at the breakfast table. I sold new cars. I sold used cars. I worked in the service department. I went to mechanic school. I have oil coursing through my veins. I went to college with more good fortune. I attended school with a guy named Bobby Rahal. Bobby went on to win the Indianapolis 500, several IndyCar championships. But for me, the good fortune was that he was racing at the time. And I asked him, how do you do this? How do you get started? And he told me, there's a driving school out in California. Go out there, see whether you like it and whether you have any talent. I loved it. And it turns out I had a little talent and I was hooked. I was severely inflicted with the racing bug. Life went on, went to graduate school, but I was still thinking about racing. I didn't know how to do it. And then good sense kicked in. I joined the Sports Car Club of America. I didn't know anything about racing, but they did. They not only knew about it, they were racing. So I went to some meetings and I discovered Solo 2, autocross. All you needed was a helmet and a street car. I had those. And so it began. More good fortune. At my very first event, I met Dr. Glenn Hanager and his wife, Elsie. Elsie was a Solo 2 national champion. They basically adopted me and mentored me for 3.5 years. We traveled around the state of Ohio, going to every event that we could. And after some good fortune, a lot of learning, I thought it was time to go back to school. More good fortune. I attended a Skip Barber school up at Mid-Ohio, and guess what? Skip was there. I guess I showed some talent because he approached me at the end and said, hey, I'm the importer for Crosley Cars. There's a new class coming to America called Sports 2000. I'm going to run 3 cars. Are you interested? Well, you bet. And so that next year we went and did that. We enjoyed some success. I did a lot of learning. And one of the things I learned was I couldn't afford to go racing like that. There had to be a better way or some other way for me if I was going to continue. Family. So the brother of my then girlfriend, Randy Hartman, was attending a mechanics school. He loved cars like I did. We teamed up and decided that we'd tow a race car around and figure out how to do this together. Well, that guy became my brother-in-law a couple years later. And 35 years later, he and I have worked and raced together throughout the United States. More family. My wife, Ronnie. Can you imagine? We've been together almost 44 years. And in that entire time, she has missed 2 of my events. The first, because she was pregnant with Corey, and Dr. Glenn Haniger said she couldn't travel. The second, because she was an event with our son. He was solo 2 racing. And speaking of him, Corey, he started just like I did. He had a little advantage. He was at a racetrack when he was 5 days old. He grew up at the racetrack, driving the golf cart around at night, visiting our friends at Lake Erie Communications at their campfires. Then he went solo 2 racing. He went club racing and ultimately on to pro racing. And he's won championships with his mom, his dad, and Uncle Randy. The final family is SCCA itself. We've made friends throughout the United States, and I don't mean just the drivers. I'm talking about the clerks of the course, the people on grid, the people on the corners and tech barn, everywhere. Lots of friends. And particularly those special people in the Ohio Valley region who have supported us, who have befriended us, who have encouraged us, and who have helped us. Thanks to you all.